The broadcast came without warning. Every screen on Earth, from the massive displays in Times Square to the smallest smartphone in a remote village in Nepal, flickered simultaneously. Static consumed the images for 3 heartbeats before resolving into something that would forever scar the collective memory of humanity. The interruption was total and complete, overriding every signal, every channel, every form of electronic communication that humanity possessed. Commander Daniel Hayes of the United Nations Space Command was in the middle of a briefing when the interruption occurred. He stood frozen, coffee cup halfway to his lips, as the holographic display in the Situation Room transformed into a window to hell. Around him, his staff had stopped moving, stopped breathing, their eyes locked on the images that now filled every screen in the facility. The image showed a vast chamber, its walls constructed of something that looked like polished obsidian threaded with veins of pulsing crimson light. The architecture was wrong in ways that made human eyes want to slide away, angles that seemed to shift when observed directly, surfaces that appeared to extend into dimensions that should not exist. At the center of the chamber stood beings that defied easy description. They were tall, perhaps 8 feet, with elongated limbs that bent at angles that seemed anatomically impossible. Their skin, if it could be called that, appeared to be a mottled gray surface that shifted and rippled like liquid mercury. Where eyes should have been, there were instead clusters of sensory organs that resembled black pearls suspended in translucent membranes. But it was not the aliens themselves that drew gasps of horror from viewers across the globe. It was what surrounded them. Cages. Hundreds of them. And within those cages were human beings. The camera, or whatever alien equivalent served that purpose, panned slowly across the scene. Men, women, children. Their clothing was torn and filthy, their faces gaunt with starvation and terror. Some clutched at the bars of their prisons, mouths open in silent screams. Others had retreated to the corners of their cages, knees drawn to their chests, rocking back and forth in the universal posture of the traumatized. A few stared blankly at nothing, their minds having retreated somewhere beyond the reach of further harm. A voice spoke then, translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously through some technology humanity could not comprehend. The voice was cold, clinical, utterly devoid of emotion. It carried the weight of absolute certainty, the tone of a being addressing creatures it considered beneath contempt. "We are the Vethkai. You are the species designated Sol 3 inhabitants." This transmission serves as notification of harvest. The specimens displayed represent a fraction of those collected from your outer colonies over the past 2 solar cycles. They have been evaluated and processed according to our protocols. Your primitive attempts at interstellar expansion have made collection efficient. Daniel felt his blood turn to ice. The outer colonies, New Providence, Athena Station, the mining settlements on Callisto, the research outpost on Titan. They had gone dark 6 months ago. The official explanation had been a catastrophic failure in the communication relay network, possibly caused by solar activity or equipment malfunction. Teams had been dispatched to investigate, but none had returned. The government had assured the public that everything was being done, that answers would come soon. Now he understood why those answers had never arrived. The camera focused on one of the aliens as it approached a cage containing a young woman. She could not have been more than 20 years old, with dark hair matted with dried blood and eyes that held the hollow look of someone who had already accepted death. The creature reached through the bars with one of its elongated limbs, and the woman did not even flinch. She had been broken beyond the capacity for fear. Daniel recognized her face from the missing persons reports. Her name was Catherine Marshall. She had been a doctoral student studying astrobiology on New Providence. "This specimen," the voice continued, "has completed processing. Observe." What followed was broadcast to 7 billion people. It lasted 43 seconds. When it was over, what remained in the cage bore no resemblance to anything that had once been human. The sounds Catherine had made would haunt the dreams of an entire planet for generations. The alien turned to face the camera directly, its sensory clusters seeming to bore through the screen and into the souls of everyone watching. There was something in its posture that might have been amusement, a predator's satisfaction in demonstrating its power over its prey. This demonstration is provided as a courtesy. Your species has proven adequate for our purposes. Harvest will continue. Resistance is irrelevant. You lack the capability to oppose us. Your fastest vessels would take generations to reach our space. Your weapons are primitive. Your defenses are non-existent. Accept this truth and your remaining populations may be processed efficiently, with minimal unnecessary suffering. The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun, screens worldwide returning to their normal programming as if nothing had happened. But nothing would ever be normal again. In homes and offices, in schools and hospitals, in military bases and government buildings around the world, humanity sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. In Geneva, United Nations Secretary-General Maria Santos stared at her blank screen for a full 30 seconds before her hands began to shake. She had served in diplomatic corps for 30 years, had navigated international crises that would have broken lesser minds, had maintained her composure through wars and famines and natural disasters, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. Nothing could have. Her assistant, a young man named Kevin Price, stood in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. His sister had been assigned to the Callisto mining operation. He was thinking of her now, wondering if she had been in one of those cages, if she had already been processed, or if she was still waiting for her turn. "Madam Secretary," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What do we do?" Maria closed her eyes. In her mind, she could still see Catherine Marshall's face, could still hear the sounds that had accompanied her death. When she opened her eyes again, something had changed within them. The despair was still there, but it had been joined by something else, something harder, something that had been dormant in humanity since the species had crawled out of the caves and learned to sharpen sticks against the predators that hunted them. "We do what we have always done when our people are threatened," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "We fight, we adapt, we survive, and we make them regret ever learning our name." Within hours, the leaders of every nation on Earth had convened in emergency session. The usual political divisions, the territorial disputes, the ideological conflicts that had defined human civilization for millennia, all of it evaporated in the face of this new reality. The Russian president sat beside the American one. The Chinese premier exchanged notes with the European Council. Ancient enemies set aside centuries of hatred because they recognized a simple truth: none of their conflicts mattered anymore. There was only one conflict now, and it transcended everything that had come before. The response was unanimous. Earth would not accept extinction. Earth would not submit to harvest. Earth would make the Vethkai regret the day they had first turned their attention toward that small blue marble orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in an unremarkable arm of an unremarkable galaxy. The declaration was simple, broadcast on every frequency humanity possessed. "We are coming for you." Dr. Susan Miller had spent her career studying theoretical physics, specifically the principles that might one day allow faster than light travel. She had published papers that were considered ahead of their time, had endured the skepticism of colleagues who considered her work fanciful, had spent long nights staring at equations that refused to balance. She had always believed that such technology was generations away, if it was possible at all. The energy requirements alone seemed insurmountable, the theoretical obstacles numerous. But as she stood in the converted warehouse that had become humanity's most important research facility, watching the impossible machine take shape before her eyes, she realized that desperation was the mother of innovation. What had seemed impossible became merely difficult when extinction was the alternative. What had seemed difficult became achievable when every mind on the planet was focused on a single goal. The alien transmission had contained more than just images of horror. Embedded in the signal, hidden within the carrier wave, was data, fragments of information that the Vethkai had not intended to share, but which their broadcast technology had inadvertently leaked. Perhaps they had been careless, confident in their superiority. Perhaps they simply had not considered that their prey might be able to analyze their communications. Whatever the reason, they had given humanity a gift. A team of cryptographers and astrophysicists had spent 3 weeks decoding that data, working in shifts, pushing themselves past exhaustion, driven by the images that played in their minds every time they closed their eyes. What they had found had changed everything. The Vethkai homeworld, its coordinates, its defenses, its vulnerabilities, the specifications of their propulsion technology, the weaknesses in their defensive systems. A treasure trove of information that the aliens would never have shared willingly, delivered straight into human hands. "They think we are primitives," said Admiral Christopher Grant, commander of what had once been the United States Navy and was now part of the Unified Earth Defense Force. He stood beside Susan, watching the prototype drive core that hummed with energies that should not exist. They broadcast their home address because they believed we could never reach them. They showed us their faces because they assumed we would never have the chance for revenge. Susan nodded, not looking away from the machine that represented humanity's only hope. They underestimated us. They saw our outer colonies, our primitive fusion drives, our chemical rockets. They judged us by our technology and found us wanting. And they did not see our will, Grant finished, our capacity for adaptation, our refusal to die quietly. They did not understand that the same species that had clawed its way from the mud to the stars would not simply surrender when the stars clawed back. The drive, based on principles reverse-engineered from the alien transmission, combined with theoretical models that had previously been dismissed as fantasy, had taken 18 months to develop. 18 months of sleepless nights, of brilliant minds pushed past the point of exhaustion, of resources diverted from every other endeavor humanity had ever pursued. The global economy had essentially ceased to exist in any recognizable form. Every factory, every laboratory, every capable hand had been conscripted for a single purpose: building a fleet capable of reaching the stars, building weapons capable of cracking worlds, building armor capable of withstanding alien fire, building humanity's revenge. Captain Rachel Murphy stood on the bridge of the Earth battleship Retribution, watching through the forward view screen as the last of the supply ships completed its docking procedure. Around her, the crew moved with quiet efficiency, each member knowing their role, each prepared to die for the mission ahead. They had trained for this moment, had sacrificed everything to be here, had left behind families and friends and lives that might never be resumed. Rachel had lost her sister on New Providence. Her sister, her brother-in-law, and her 2 nephews. The oldest had been 7, had just started to learn multiplication tables. The youngest had been 4, had still believed in magic and monsters. Now Rachel knew that monsters were real, and she was going to hunt them across the stars. When she had volunteered for the Retribution's crew, the psychological evaluators had expressed concern about her emotional state. They worried that her grief would compromise her judgment, that her desire for vengeance would cloud her tactical thinking. She had looked them in the eyes and told them the truth. "I'm not driven by rage," she had said. "I am driven by responsibility. Someone has to make sure this never happens again. Someone has to show the universe that humanity is not prey. Someone has to make them pay for what they did. If that someone is me, then so be it." They had cleared her for duty. Not because they believed her, they could see the fire burning behind her calm facade, but because they understood that fire would be useful in the days ahead. Now, as she watched the fleet assemble through the bridge's panoramic display, she allowed herself a moment of something approaching pride. 147 ships, every vessel humanity could build, arm, and crew in the time they had been given. It was not much by galactic standards, she suspected. The Vethkai probably had thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, technology refined over millennia. But humanity's fleet was everything Earth had, and Earth had poured its heart and soul into every hull plate, every weapon system, every navigation computer. The Retribution itself was the flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons systems that incorporated both human ingenuity and reverse-engineered alien technology. Its armor was layered with materials that had not existed 2 years ago. Its engines could propel it across light years in days rather than centuries. Its weapons could crack planets, at least according to the simulations. They had never been tested in actual combat. Captain. Her executive officer, Commander Lisa Chen, approached with a datapad. Lisa had lost her parents on Titan Station. Like Rachel, she had channeled her grief into purpose. All ships report ready for transit. Admiral Grant has transmitted final authorization. The fleet is yours to command. Rachel took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of no return. Once they jumped, there would be no coming back until the mission was complete or until they were all dead. Signal the fleet, jump in 5 minutes. And Lisa, yes, Captain, make sure the recording systems are active. Whatever happens today, I want humanity to remember it. I want our children's children to know what we did and why we did it. I want the galaxy to see what happens when you threaten Earth. The Vethkai had conquered 47 species across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. They had harvested populations numbering in the trillions. They had existed for longer than humanity's sun had burned, their civilization ancient beyond human comprehension. In all that time, they had never encountered significant resistance. They had never needed to develop tactics for dealing with a species that fought back. This was not because their victims were weak or cowardly. Many of the harvested species had possessed technology far in advance of humanity's. Some had built empires spanning dozens of star systems. A few had even achieved a level of cultural and scientific sophistication that the Vethkai grudgingly respected. But respect did not translate to mercy. Resources were resources, regardless of their intelligence. The Vethkai were successful because they were careful. They selected targets who lacked the technology to fight back effectively. They struck quickly, harvesting enough specimens to satisfy their needs before moving on. They never pushed a species to the point of desperation, never took so many that the survivors would band together in unified resistance. They were farmers in their own way, tending their crops with ruthless efficiency. With humanity, they had made an error. They had underestimated the speed at which a species could advance when properly motivated. They had not anticipated that a civilization that had barely achieved interplanetary travel could develop faster than light capability in less than 2 years. They had not imagined that beings with such short lifespans could organize a coordinated response across an entire planet, setting aside ancient hatreds and petty conflicts in the face of existential threat. Most critically, they had not understood the effect their broadcast would have. They had intended it as a demonstration of dominance, a psychological weapon to crush hope before it could form. They had expected humanity to fall into despair, to turn on itself, to spend its remaining years squabbling over resources while waiting for the harvest to continue. Instead, they had unified a fractured species and given it a target for its grief and rage. They had shown humanity exactly what it was fighting against, had burned images into 7 billion minds that would never be forgotten or forgiven. They had created the very thing they had sought to prevent, a species willing to risk everything for the chance at revenge. The first warning the Vethkai received of the incoming fleet was when their outer sensor platforms detected transit signatures. The readings made no sense to the technicians monitoring them. The energy patterns were clearly artificial, clearly designed for interstellar travel, but they did not match any known species. By the time the data had been processed and relayed to the homeworld, by the time commanders had been roused and strategies debated, the human ships were already in system. Admiral Grant stood in the command center of the carrier Resolution, watching the tactical display as his fleet emerged from hyperspace. The Vethkai homeworld hung before them, a massive planet wreathed in clouds of toxic atmosphere, its surface covered in structures that defied human architectural understanding. Cities that seemed to grow like crystals from the ground, spires that reached into the upper atmosphere, networks of light that pulsed with rhythms that suggested something organic. It was beautiful in its way. It was also the home of the creatures that had murdered his people. Report, he commanded. 147 ships successfully transited. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster, responded. All weapon systems online. Enemy fleet detected in high orbit. Count is. She paused, her face paling as the numbers scrolled across her display. 3,400 vessels, sir, ranging from patrol craft to what appear to be capital ships. Grant felt the weight of those numbers settle on his shoulders. They had expected to be outnumbered. They had not expected to be outnumbered by this margin. 3,400 to 147. Those were not odds. Those were a death sentence written in mathematics. But he had also seen what the Vethkai had done to the colonists on that broadcast. He had watched as they had demonstrated their harvest protocols on Catherine Marshall, who might have been his own daughter's age. He had made a promise to himself and to every human being who had died in alien captivity. He was going to keep that promise, odds be damned. All ships, he said, his voice carrying across the fleet-wide communication network. This is Admiral Grant. We all know why we are here. We have seen what these creatures do. We have watched them murder our people for their entertainment, broadcast their atrocities as a message of dominance. Today, we show them the cost of that choice. Today, we teach the galaxy that humanity is not to be hunted. He paused, looking at the faces of his bridge crew. Young men and women who had left everything behind to be here, who knew they might not survive the day, who had come anyway, driven by duty and grief and the simple refusal to accept extinction. All ships attack formation. Target their orbital defense platforms first, then focus fire on their largest vessels. Coordinate your fire, watch your flanks, and remember your training. And remember, no quarter. They showed us none. We will show them the same. The battle that followed would be remembered in human history as the Day of Reckoning. It would be studied in military academies for centuries, analyzed by tacticians and historians, recreated in countless simulations. It would become the subject of books, films, and virtual recreations that would attempt to capture its scope and horror and triumph. It was also a slaughter. On both sides. The human ships were faster than the Vethkai had anticipated. Their weapons hit harder than alien defensive systems were designed to withstand. The reverse-engineered technology that powered the fleet incorporated improvements and innovations that the original designers had never conceived. Humanity had not simply copied Vethkai science. They had improved upon it, combined it with their own insights, pushed it past limitations the aliens had accepted as fundamental. The result was ships that moved like predators and struck like hammers. Captain Murphy guided the Retribution through the chaos of battle, her voice steady as she issued commands. Hard to port. Fire main batteries at that cruiser. Launch torpedoes spread at the orbital platform. Keep us moving, we are too big a target to stay still. Navigation, find me a firing solution on that cluster of patrol ships. Weapons, prepare a concentrated burst when I give the signal. The Vethkai fought back with everything they had. Their weapons were powerful, their ships numerous. For every alien vessel destroyed, it seemed two more emerged from the dockyards that ringed the planet. Beams of energy crossed the void, seeking human ships, finding them, turning metal and flesh into plasma. But the human fleet was not fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. They were fighting for extinction, theirs or the Vethkai's. There was no middle ground, no possibility of negotiation, no outcome that did not end with one species triumphant and the other destroyed. 3 hours into the battle, the tide began to turn. The Vethkai command structure, designed to manage harvesting operations rather than full-scale warfare, struggled to coordinate an effective response. Their admirals had never faced an enemy willing to take losses, willing to sacrifice ships for tactical advantage, willing to die as long as they took the enemy with them. Human ships worked in perfect coordination, each captain trusting their fellows to hold their position, to protect their flanks, to take the shots that needed to be taken. Then the unthinkable happened. The Retribution sensors detected a massive energy buildup on the planet's surface. Something was powering up, something big, something that dwarfed anything the humans had seen so far. Captain Murphy studied the readout, her blood running cold. They have a planetary defense weapon, she reported to the fleet. Power signature suggests it can destroy multiple ships with a single discharge. Estimated time to activation, 4 minutes. Admiral Grant's response came immediately. All ships focus fire on that installation. We cannot let them activate it. Everything we have right now. The fleet turned as one, pouring everything they had into the weapon emplacement on the surface, but the Vethkai had protected it well. Shields layered upon shields absorbed the incoming fire, each one failing only to reveal another beneath. The energy buildup continued, climbing steadily toward the activation threshold. Rachel made a decision. She did not consult with Admiral Grant. She did not ask for authorization. There was no time and she knew what needed to be done. All hands, she announced, this is the captain. Prepare for surface assault run. We are going to ram that weapon. The bridge fell silent. Commander Chen stepped forward, her face pale but determined. Captain, that is a suicide run. The atmospheric friction alone, I know. Rachel turned to face her crew. Every person there had volunteered for this mission had known they might not return. But there was a difference between accepting the possibility of death and being told that death was certain. I am not ordering any of you to stay. Anyone who wants to reach the escape pods, go now. No one will think less of you. You have served with honor. No one moved. Not a single crew member stirred from their station. Rachel felt tears prick at her eyes, but she forced them back. This was not the time for emotion. This was the time for action. Then let us show these monsters what humans are made of. Navigation, plot a course directly for that weapon. Engineering, give me everything the engines have. We are going to need every bit of speed we can get. The Retribution dove toward the planet's surface, its engines screaming at maximum output. Vethkai ships tried to intercept, but the rest of the human fleet moved to screen the flagship, sacrificing themselves to clear a path. Explosions bloomed across the void as ship after ship was destroyed, each crew knowing their deaths would give the Retribution the seconds it needed. The planetary weapon fired. The beam of energy that erupted from its muzzle was visible from orbit, a column of destruction that annihilated everything in its path. 12 human ships vanished in an instant, their crews never knowing what had hit them. The beam swept across space like the finger of an angry god, but the Retribution was not among the casualties. Rachel had anticipated the shot, had calculated its trajectory based on the weapon's orientation, had maneuvered her massive ship with a precision that should have been impossible for something so large. The beam passed close enough to scorch the hull plating, to send temperature warnings screaming across every display on the bridge, but it did not strike home. Then the Retribution hit the weapon installation at a significant fraction of light speed. The impact was cataclysmic. The kinetic energy released was equivalent to several nuclear weapons detonating simultaneously. The weapon installation was not merely destroyed, it was vaporized, along with everything within a 50-kilometer radius. The shock wave propagated outward, triggering earthquakes that shattered AI cities across an entire continent. A mushroom cloud rose into the atmosphere, visible from space, a testament to what humanity was willing to sacrifice. The Retribution, of course, did not survive. Captain Rachel Murphy and her crew died in the impact, their final thoughts lost to history. But they took the planetary defense weapon with them, and they gave the fleet the chance it needed. Admiral Grant watched the destruction from the Resolution's bridge, his face carved from stone. On the tactical display, the icon representing the Retribution flickered and went dark. Around it, the other casualties of the charge were marked in red, 12 ships, nearly 4,000 souls, gone in an instant. She bought us time, he said quietly. Do not waste it. All ships continue the attack. Make their sacrifice mean something. The battle continued for another 6 hours. Without their planetary weapon, without their central command structure, destroyed when a human cruiser crashed through their orbital headquarters, the Vethkai defense began to crumble. Human ships pushed deeper into the system, destroying orbital facilities, shipyards, and anything that looked like it might produce weapons or vessels. By the end of the first day, the Vethkai fleet had been reduced to scattered remnants. By the end of the second day, their orbital infrastructure had been systematically dismantled. By the end of the week, human forces had established a presence on the surface itself, moving through the alien cities with methodical precision, securing strategic locations and eliminating resistance wherever they found it. What they found in those cities confirmed every horrible suspicion they had harbored since the broadcast. Processing facilities filled with human remains, the equipment still warm from recent use. Storage units containing preserved specimens from dozens of species, each labeled with cold precision. Records detailing harvests spanning thousands of years, millions of worlds, trillions of victims. The scale of the atrocity was almost incomprehensible. The Vethkai had not simply harvested for food or labor. They had harvested for pleasure, for entertainment, for the sheer joy of demonstrating their dominance over lesser species. The broadcast that had so horrified humanity had been, to them, a work of art, a celebration of their superiority, something to be proud of, to share with future generations as an example of their greatness. When Admiral Grant read the translated records, he felt something die inside him. The last trace of mercy, perhaps. The final vestige of the belief that all intelligent life deserved a chance at redemption, that even the most monstrous beings might have some spark of decency that could be reached. He gave the order that would define humanity's relationship with the galaxy for millennia to come. No survivors, not one, find them all. The extermination of the Vethkai took 3 months. Human forces swept across their homeworld and their colony planets, leaving nothing alive. Not combatants, not civilians, not children. The species that had harvested humanity was harvested in turn, every last individual tracked down and eliminated with the same cold efficiency they had once applied to their own victims. Some on Earth protested. They called it genocide, which it was. They said humanity was becoming the monsters it had set out to destroy. They warned of the moral cost, the spiritual damage that would be inflicted on the soldiers tasked with the killing. They pleaded for mercy, for trials, for some path forward that did not require the complete destruction of an entire species. The soldiers themselves, the men and women who had seen the processing facilities and the storage units and the records, did not hesitate. They did their duty with cold efficiency, and if some of them wept in their bunks at night, if some of them would spend the rest of their lives haunted by what they had done, they were still in formation the next morning. They had seen what mercy would mean: more broadcasts, more harvests, more young women dying in cages for alien entertainment. When it was over, when the last Vethkai had been hunted down and eliminated, Admiral Grant stood in the ruins of what had once been their capital city. Around him, the alien structures were being demolished, every trace of the species being erased from existence. Soon there would be nothing left to show that the Vethkai had ever existed except records in human databases and the scars they had left on human souls. A young lieutenant approached him, saluting crisply. "Sir, the final sweep is complete. No remaining life signs detected on any Vethkai world. The species is extinct." Grant nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words settle into his bones. "And our losses? 84 ships destroyed, 42,000 personnel killed in action. Another 16,000 wounded, many critically. The medical ships are working around the clock. Nearly 60,000 human beings, each one with a family, with friends, with a life they would never live. And yet, compared to what the Vethkai had inflicted on humanity's colonies, compared to the millions who had died in their processing facilities, compared to Catherine Marshall and everyone else who had been broadcast dying for alien amusement, it seemed almost merciful." The lieutenant hesitated before speaking again. "Sir, there is something else. We found records indicating that the Vethkai had contact with other spacefaring civilizations. Many of them are aware of what happened here. They are watching, waiting to see what we do next." Grant smiled grimly. "Good. Let them watch. Let them learn. Let every species in this galaxy understand what happens when you threaten Earth." He turned to face the stars, visible even through the toxic haze of the Vethkai atmosphere. Somewhere out there, other civilizations were wondering if they were next. Some were probably terrified. Others might be planning their own attacks, hoping to eliminate the threat before it could grow stronger. A few might even see an opportunity for alliance with the strange, violent newcomers who had done what no other species had managed. Let them all see. Let them all learn the lesson the Vethkai had paid for with their existence. Humanity remembered its dead, and humanity did not forgive. The years that followed saw humanity emerge onto the galactic stage in a way no one had anticipated. The technology captured from the Vethkai, combined with human innovation, allowed the construction of new ships, faster and more powerful than anything that had come before. The drive that had once been a desperate improvisation became the standard propulsion system for human vessels, enabling colonization on a scale that would have seemed impossible just a generation earlier. But more important than the technology was the reputation. The story of what humanity had done spread across the galaxy, carried by traders and travelers and the communications networks that linked inhabited worlds. A primitive species, barely capable of interplanetary travel, had traveled to the homeworld of one of the galaxy's oldest and most feared civilizations and had erased them from existence. Not defeated them, not conquered them, not subjugated them. Erased them. Utterly and completely. Other species reacted in different ways. Some were horrified, viewing humanity's actions as monstrous and unjustifiable, proof that the newcomers were just as dangerous as the Vethkai had been. Others were cautiously approving, grateful that someone had finally dealt with the Vethkai threat, had done what their own civilizations had been too weak or too afraid to attempt. Many were simply terrified, recognizing that a new power had emerged that was capable of doing what no other species had ever managed, and wondering if they might be next. On Earth, the victory was celebrated, but the celebrations were tempered by the cost. The names of the fallen were inscribed on monuments in every city, every town, every village that had sent its children to fight among the stars. The survivors of the outer colonies, those few who had been rescued from Vethkai captivity, were treated as honored guests of the species they had helped to save. Their stories, painful as they were recorded for posterity. Dr. Susan Miller, who had led the team that developed the faster-than-light drive, was awarded every honor humanity could bestow. She accepted them graciously, but those who knew her could see that she took no pleasure in recognition. She had built a weapon, after all. A terrible weapon that had enabled terrible things. The fact that those things had been necessary did not make them any easier to bear. But necessary things, she told herself in the quiet hours of the night, when sleep refused to come and memories refused to fade. Necessary things done by necessary people in necessary times. It was cold comfort. It was the only comfort available. 10 years after the Battle of Vethkai Prime, Secretary General Maria Santos addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations. She was older now, her hair silver, her face lined with the weight of decisions that had shaped history. But her eyes were still clear, still determined, still carrying the fire that had been kindled on the day of the broadcast. "We did not choose this path," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber and beyond to every human being listening across the solar system and the new colonies beyond. "We did not seek out the Vethkai. We did not provoke them. We simply existed, and for that crime they decided we should be harvested like animals, processed for their entertainment, broadcast as a demonstration of their power." She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "We responded as any species would. We fought back. And when we realized that fighting back would not be enough, that the Vethkai would never stop, would never show mercy, would never treat us as anything other than resources to be exploited, we made a choice. The hardest choice any civilization has ever faced." Another pause, longer this time. The chamber was absolutely silent. "We chose to survive, whatever the cost, whatever the moral weight. We chose to ensure that our children and our children's children would never have to face the horror of being processed in an alien facility, of being broadcast across the stars as a demonstration of their captor's power. We chose to make ourselves so dangerous, so absolutely committed to our own survival, that no species would ever again consider us prey." She straightened, her voice taking on an edge of steel. "There are those who say we went too far, that we should have shown mercy, that we should have accepted surrender, negotiated terms, found some way to coexist with the Vethkai. To those critics, I have only one response. Show me a Vethkai that ever showed mercy to their victims. Show me a single record, a single instance, a single case where they allowed a harvested species to survive intact. Show me a child spared, a city left standing, a culture permitted to continue. Show me that, and I will reconsider our actions." The silence that followed was absolute. We did what we had to do, Maria continued, and we would do it again, because that is who we are now. We are the species that survived. We are the species that fought back. We are the species that taught the galaxy a lesson it will never forget. She looked directly into the cameras, knowing her words were being transmitted to audiences she could not even imagine, to species watching from across the stars, to civilizations that were even now debating what to do about the dangerous newcomers from Sol. Humanity is not prey, and any civilization that forgets that fact will learn it the way the Vethkai did. We hope that lesson never needs to be repeated, but we are prepared to teach it as many times as necessary. In the decades that followed, humanity expanded across the stars. They encountered other species, some friendly, some hostile, most simply wary. Diplomatic relations were established, treaties were signed, trade routes were opened. The galaxy proved to be a vast and complex place, filled with wonders and horrors in equal measure. There were species that became genuine allies, species that became trading partners, species that maintained careful distance. But no species ever again tried to harvest humanity. No civilization ever again assumed that the small, short-lived beings from the unremarkable planet orbiting the yellow star were easy prey. The lesson of the Vethkai had been learned, written in fire and blood, and the complete extinction of a species that had thought itself invincible. On the anniversary of the Battle of Vethkai Prime, humans across the galaxy paused to remember. They remembered the colonists who had died in captivity, whose only crime had been to reach for the stars. They remembered the soldiers who had sacrificed themselves to ensure victory, who had known they were going to die and had done their duty anyway. They remembered the Retribution and its brave captain who had given everything to destroy the weapon that would have ended the battle before it truly began. But they also remembered what they had become in the process. The innocent species that had once looked at the stars with wonder and hope had been transformed into something harder, something more dangerous, something capable of the same ruthlessness as any predator in the galaxy. They had proven that they could do terrible things when terrible things were necessary. Some mourned this loss of innocence. Others celebrated it as a necessary evolution, a coming of age for a species that had been naive about the dangers of the universe. Most simply accepted it as the price of survival, neither proud nor ashamed, simply aware. The Vethkai had broadcast their atrocities to the universe, expecting to inspire terror and submission. Instead, they had awakened something in humanity that had been dormant for too long. They had reminded a complacent species that the universe was not a safe place, that survival required vigilance, strength, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary. They had taught humanity how to be monsters, and humanity had proven to be very good students. At the edge of human space, on a planet that had been colonized just 5 years earlier, a young woman named Emma Scott stood watching the sunset. The sky was purple here, streaked with clouds of amber and gold, and 2 moons hung on the horizon like pale sentinels. It was beautiful, perhaps the most beautiful sight she had ever seen, a reminder of how far humanity had come in such a short time. She was the granddaughter of one of the Retribution's crew members. Her grandmother had served in engineering, had been part of the team that kept the engines running during that final desperate dive. She had died when the ship hit the planetary weapon, had become one of the names inscribed on monuments across Earth and beyond. Emma had grown up with stories of the battle, of the sacrifice, of the victory that had cost so much. Her mother had told her about grandmother's letters, written before the fleet departed, expressing her fears and her hopes and her determination to do what needed to be done. Those letters were family treasures now, read at gatherings, preserved in protective cases. Sometimes Emma wondered what her grandmother would think of the galaxy they had created, a galaxy where humanity was feared and respected, where no species dared threaten Earth or its colonies, where the name Vethkai was spoken only in historical texts and memorial ceremonies. Would she be proud of what her sacrifice had bought? Would she be horrified by the methods that had been required? Would she recognize the descendants of the species she had died to protect? Emma did not know. She was not sure anyone could know. The questions were too big, the implications too vast for any single mind to comprehend. Philosophy and ethics had been debating the day of reckoning for decades, and they would probably continue debating it for centuries more. But as she watched the alien sun sink below the horizon, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she felt something that might have been hope. Humanity had survived. Humanity had grown. Humanity had learned lessons that would never be forgotten, paid prices that could never be fully calculated. And somewhere out there, in the vast emptiness between the stars, the legacy of the Vethkai served as a warning, a monument to what happened when predators chose the wrong prey, a reminder that the universe was full of dangers, but that humanity was one of them. The night deepened, and Emma turned to walk back to her settlement. Above her, a human ship passed overhead, its lights blinking against the darkness, heading out toward the frontier and the unknown challenges that waited there. It was a scout vessel, she thought, probably mapping new systems for potential colonization. She smiled as she watched it go. Whatever came next, humanity would be ready. They had paid for that readiness in blood and sacrifice and moral compromise. But they had paid it, and now the debt was settled. The universe had shown them its teeth, and they had bitten back harder. The galaxy had learned not to threaten Earth, and Earth had learned that some lessons once taught could never be unlearned. In a memorial hall on Earth, built on the site where the original broadcast had been received, a holographic display played on continuous loop. It showed the faces of every human being who had died in Vethkai captivity, every soldier who had fallen in the battle for their homeworld, every colonist who had paid the price for humanity's vulnerability. It was updated regularly as new names were discovered in alien records, as new identities were confirmed through genetic analysis. Millions of faces, millions of names, millions of stories that had ended too soon. Visitors came from across human space to stand before that display, to bear witness to what had been lost and what had been gained. They came in silence, they left in silence, and the weight of history pressed down on them like a physical force. Some wept, some prayed, some simply stood, absorbing the magnitude of the sacrifice that had made their lives possible. Among the faces was Rachel Murphy, captain of the Retribution. Her image smiled out from the display, captured in a moment before the battle, before the sacrifice, before she had become a legend. She looked young, too young to have carried the burden that had ultimately consumed her, too young to have made the decision that had changed the course of the war. But she had carried it. She had carried it all the way to the heart of the enemy, and she had delivered it with the force of a species that would not be denied. Her final moments were lost to history. No recording had survived the impact, but her legacy endured in every human being who drew breath under alien suns. Below her image, an inscription read, "She taught us that the measure of a species is not how it treats those who serve it, but how far it will go to protect those who cannot protect themselves." It was a fitting epitaph. For her, for all of them, for an era of human history that had transformed everything humanity believed about itself and its place in the universe. The broadcast had shown humanity at its most vulnerable, its most helpless, its most afraid. The response had shown humanity at its most determined, its most ruthless, its most unstoppable. Both were true. Both would always be true. The Vethkai had murdered millions on a live feed. Earth had destroyed their species without mercy. And the galaxy would never forget either lesson. Years later, when humanity's first true ambassador to the galactic community took her seat at the Council of Species, she was asked a question by a delegate from a civilization that had existed for 10,000 years. The question was simple, asked with genuine curiosity rather than hostility. What drives your species? What makes you who you are? Ambassador Linda Walsh considered the question carefully before answering. She thought about the broadcast, about the battle, about the decades of expansion and adaptation that had followed. She thought about her grandfather, who had served on one of the escort ships that had sacrificed itself to protect the Retribution during its final run. She thought about the memorial hall on Earth, about the faces that scrolled endlessly across its displays. "We are driven by memory," she said finally. "We remember our dead. We remember our wounds. We remember every threat we have faced and every enemy we have overcome. and we remember that the universe does not grant safety to those who assume they deserve it. The delegate nodded slowly, processing this response. And if another species threatens you again? Linda met the being's sensory appendages, the closest equivalent to eye contact that their anatomy permitted, and smiled without warmth. Then we will remind the galaxy of the lesson we taught the Vethkai. We will remind them that humanity does not forgive. We will remind them that there are some lines that should never be crossed. She paused, letting her words sink into every delegate in the chamber. We hope that reminder will never be necessary. We are a species that prefers peace, prefers trade, prefers the slow building of relationships based on mutual benefit. But we are also a species that learned, in the hardest possible way, that hope without strength is merely wishful thinking. We will never be weak again. We will never be prey again. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then slowly the delegates began to signal their acknowledgement, their understanding, their respect. Not affection. Humanity was too new, too dangerous, too unpredictable for affection. But respect. The recognition that the newcomers from the small blue planet had earned their place among the stars. Ambassador Walsh settled back in her seat, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. Behind her, in a display case that she carried everywhere, was a fragment of hull plating from the Retribution, recovered from the ruins of the Vethkai weapon installation. It was scorched and twisted, barely recognizable as having once been part of a starship. But it was real. It was proof. It was a reminder. The stars were beautiful tonight, she thought, looking out through the viewport of the council chamber. Beautiful and vast and filled with dangers that humanity was only beginning to understand. But humanity was part of that vastness now, part of that danger, part of the great tapestry of intelligent life that spread across the galaxy. They had earned that place. They had paid for it in blood, and they would hold it, whatever the cost, for as long as the stars continued to burn.